who settled in Libya territories, particularly in the coastal area. With the end of the World War II and the defeat of Italy, the Italian colonial territories were gradually under Allied administration. In Libya, the question of sovereignty becomes central as the Allied powers sought to determine the future of the country. In 1951, Libya gained its independence, becoming the Kingdom of Libya under the monarchy of King Idris. Independence marked the beginning of a period of tensions between the Libyan authorities and the resident Italian community, which was by then well established in the countries. The, Italian, the Italians who remained in Libya after the Second World War found themselves in ambiguous positions. The Libyan authorities began to exclude Italians from participating in the political and economic life of the new state. Most Italians continued to remain in Libya until the 1970s when Muammar Gaddafi regime took power. Okay. One of the first measures taken by Gaddafi regime was the nationalization of property owned by Italians, agricultural land, businesses, and real estate. In increasingly hostile climate, the presence of Italians became untenable. By 1970, Gaddafi started a campaign against the foreign presence in Libya. He declared that the country would no longer tolerate the colonial presence and began to expel Italians. Under the Gaddafi rule, many Italians faced increasing violence and discrimination. Their homes were seized, property expropriated, and in some cases, ultimatums were issued for them to leave their countries. Gaddafi's rhetoric focused on fighting neocolonialism and advancing his pan-Arab and anti-imperialist goals. In this context, Italians were seen as symbols of colonial domination and foreign presence that needed to be eliminated. So the decision to leave Libya was motivated mainly by fear for personal safety and economic hardship. Many Italians found themselves forced to leave their homes without a clear plan of the settlement or assurance of financial compensation in Italy. Italians who had lived in Libya for generations felt they had built their lives there, but the political instability made their continued stay untenable. The migration flow to Italy it was concluded within a few months. From the publication of the decree declaring the confiscation of all property belonging to Italians, on July of 1970s, and the consequent expulsion of the entire community happened in October of 1970s. At this date, around 20,000 Italians left Libya. The returns arrived in Italy without a support plan and faced economic difficulties and lack of social support. The Libya government never compensated Italians for their lost property or for the damage they incurred during expropriation. But the issues was passed to Italian government. One of the most tragic aspects of this situation was the overcrowding of refugee camps and the temporary reception center that hosted a significant portion of the Italian repatriated from Libya. These camps were created to manage the housing emergency and the difficult social situation the repatriates were facing in Italy, but the living conditions were extremely harsh. Many of Italians repatriated from Libya who had been used to a certain level of economic and social stability in Libya found themselves facing a very different reality in Italy. The initial reception was poor, and the Italian authorities, although attempting to address the emergency, were not always able to provide the necessary physiological, social, and material support. The situation in the refugee camp was not only precarious but also marked by a deep sense of marginalization and a difficult integration. The Italians repatriated from Libya, although from a similar culture and language background to native Italians, were perceived as a separate category. Their life experience in Libya had made them somewhat different from other Italians, both culturally and socially. Despite being, in fact, Italian citizens, many of them felt like strangers in their own country due to marginalization and the difficulty of fitting in the local community. The refugees camp often become places where people lived in wait for a better futures, but with no guarantees. The scarcity of resources, the difficulty of re-entering in the labor market, and the lack of social opportunities kept the repatriates in a state of isolation. The experience of marginalization and economic hardship were compounded by the trauma of losing their lands and their property in Libya, creating a situation of great vulnerability. Compensations for Italian repatriates from Libya has been a matter of discussion since 1970s uh, to our days. But the compensation process has been slow, partial, and full of difficulties. Many repatriates faced a difficult reality. They had lost valuable property, had seen the family and social ties they had built in Libya destroyed, but official compensation was poorly developed. The Italian government did not initially take decisive action to compensate the victims, although some measures were adopted to support the repatriates, such as subsidies and tax break for the purchase of new homes in Italy. However, these measures were insufficient and failed to adequately cover the economic and physiological damage suffered by the repatriates. It was only in the 1990s, with the growing attention on the issues related to the former Italian colonies, that the Italian government began to consider a more significant compensation. Compensation policy, however, remained confused and fragmented, without a definitive solution for all Italians who had suffered material damage. A major step in the issues of compensations came in 2008 with the signing of the Treaty of Friendship, Partnership and Cooperation between Italy and Libya. The treaty was an attempt to normalize the relations between the two countries and also included provisions for compensations for victims of colonial crimes, including those harmed by the policy of expropriation and expulsion of Italians. However, the treaty failed to meet the expectations of the repatriates. This is remastered in English. Okay. Who felt that the compensation promised by the Italian government was insufficient and not being distributed equitably among the parties involved. The return had a significant impact on the regions of origin, especially in southern Italy, which was still facing economic challenges. The resources of the returns were insufficient to spur to develop in the poorest regions, and the many had to start from scratch without the support of the Italian government. The history of the repatriations of Italians from Libya is often underreported and rarely discussed in educational curricula. However, this event had a profound impact on Italy's colonial history and the forced migration narratives. Despite of the lack of official testimony, the story of the returns has been told by many families through memories and personal stories. The Italians repatriated from Libya were often overlooked in the broader historical narrative of migration, unlike other waves of post World War II migration, such as the influx of southern Italy migrants to northern Italy or the migrants workers from other countries to Italy. The return of the colonists from Libya was not widely discussed or commemorated. The memory of their experience was buried in the broader context of decolonization and the denial of colonial legacies. For many years, Italy did not engage with the painful realities of its colonial past, and the story of those who were forced to return were excluded from mainstream historical discussions. This absence of recognition led to a marginalization of the return's voice in national narratives. Their stories were relegated to the realm of personal memories, family anecdotes, and their occasional local histories, rather than become part of a national collective memory. Much like other former colonial powers, Italy has struggled to confront the legacy of its colonial ventures in Africa, including Libya. The country's post-war identity was shaped more by the reconstruction of the economic and political structures, rather than a reflective engagement with the colonialism and its aftermath. As a result, the returns become part of a larger historical amnesia. Their migration was not framed as forced migration or as part of a larger story of colonial decolonization, but instead was often seen as a resettlement of individuals who had simply returned to their homeland. This view overlooked the fact that many of these Italians had been born and raised in Libya and had lived there for generations. They had developed their own sense of identity and the community, which was drastically disrupted by the political upheavals in the countries. Mhm. Here we have some laws issued by Italian government. As you can see, start in the 1970. and the last one is in the 2011. The second case is about Italian repatriate after Tunisia independence. Uh, Prior to Tunisia independence in 1956, Tunisia was a French protectorate, but a significant number of Italians had settled there during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Italian in Tunisia were primarily involved in agricultural business and trade. The Italians in Tunisia were largely concentrated in the coastal regions, particularly in cities like Tunis, Sousse, and Sfax, and had built a thriving community. Italian migrants, most from southern Italy, has established strong economic and social ties to the region, including property ownership, land cultivation, and small business operation. Tunisia gained, Tunisia gained its independence from France uh, on March 20 of 1956 under the leadership of Habib Bourguiba, who became the first president of Tunisia. With independence, the new Tunisian state saw the nationalized key sector of the economy and asserted its sovereignty. This included land reform and the nationalization of foreign-owned business, a move that targeted not just French colonists, but also the other European settlers, particularly the Italians. The Italian government at the time, as with the Libyan case a few years later, had limited capacity to protect the interests of citizens living abroad. The nationalization process was particularly difficult for the Italian, who had deep-rooted familial and economic ties to the land and felt profound attachment to Tunisia, a country they considered their home. Mm, migration force. As with the Italians expelled from Libya, although in the case of Tunisia an expulsion decree was issued, the move was not voluntary but was driven by political and economic pressures. The land reforms, along with growing tensions between the new government and the European settlers, led to an exodus of Italian community. Between the late 1950s and the early 1960s, approximately 50,000 and to 60,000 Italians were repatriated from Tunisia to Italy. Many Italians who left Tunisia were unprepared for the realities of starting over in Italy. They had spent a generation in Tunisia and their connection to the homeland had been weakened over the time. Like their counterparts from Libya, they faced economical and social difficulties upon arrival. The repatriates arrived in Italy at the time when Italy was experiencing its own economic challenges. The return faced poverty, unemployment, and the lack of social support as the country struggled to modernize and adjust to needs of its own citizens. In the period before independence, France had begun to grant French citizenship to a significant portion of Italians residing in Tunisia, exploiting the colonial connection and the Francization policies. This process led to a granting of French citizenship to many Italians, a step that would have an important impact on their futures. The French citizenship grant to Italians during the colonial period became a key opportunity for many for them after Tunisia independence. France not only recognized the citizenship acquired during the protectorate, but did so with the intent of maintaining economical, political, and cultural ties with its former colonies. For the repatriate, for the Italians repatriates, having French citizenship meant more opportunities in terms of civil rights and freedom of movement within Europe, but especially access to a better labor market and education system than what they could have found in Italy. Many many Italians repatriated from Tunisia, therefore, not only had to return to Italy, but choose to move to France later on, where they had a strong network of colleagues, friends, and relatives. France represents a favorite destination due to its geographical proximity and the possibility of integrating into a society with a shared colonial history. The reason that drove many Italians to choose France rather than remaining in Italy include job opportunities, French citizenship, social and cultural networks, and previous experience in a French-speaking countries. As the Italian case, the transition from Tunisia ports to refugees camp in France marked a painful part of the historical memory of the Franco-Italians. Despite citizenship and the promise of a better future, reception in the transit camp was marked by material and physiological difficulties. The historical memory of this experience is steeped in frustration, as many found themselves living in overcrowded conditions and without clear prospect for their settlement. The refuge camps were not merely places of transit, but spaces where the difficulty of integration became tangible. While France offered the opportunity for a new life, the shift from colonialism to life in a country that was trying to integrate numerous migration flows generated a sense of disorientation. For many, the memory of these conditions remained a difficult experience to overcome, a, a reality that bound them to the struggle for dignity that seemed elusive in an environment of social difference. The historical memory of the Italo Tunisian community was also enriched by the difficulties of integration that were not solely tied to the language or economic difference, but also to identity conflict. While the Italo Tunisians were largely Italian by origin, they had never been fully assimilated either by the Tunisia or by Italy, and their reception in France occurred in a multicultural context that was rapidly evolving. The historical memory of a community that, while European, still felt alien in France is reflected in many stories of exclusion and marginalization. In a social context that faces the difficulties of welcoming not just new migrants, but also the challenges of national identity, the Italo-Tunisians had to negotiate their place in a France that, while recognizing them as citizens, continued to see them as others. Cultural, social, and even economic barriers were intertwined with the historical memory of a community that had lived between two worlds, the Tunisian and the Italian, now searching for balance in a French context. Despite these difficulties, over a long term, the Franc-Italian community in France succeeded in building its own Franc-Italian identity. The historical memory of this community was enriched with a new dimension, that of integration into French society. While maintaining ties to Italy and Tunisia, many Italians began to identify as French, with a strong Italian cultural influence. The memory of dual belonging was manifested in subsequent generations who learned to live between Italian and French identities, carrying forward Italian family tradition while integrating into a French social and economic life. This blending of historical memories and cultural identities allowed the Italian community to contribute to an essential aspect of French society, its diversity. Despite initial difficulties, the Italian community became a vital component of contemporary France, bringing with it the historical memory of a long migration experience, colonialism, and receptions. As the Libyan case, we have some law issued by the French government. And the last, similar to the Italian repatriates from Libya, the experience of those repatriates from Tunisia have been largely neglected in Italian historical discourse. The event of repatriation is often not highlighted in mainstream discussions of post-colonial migration or the Italian colonial experience. While family and local memories have preserved the stories of many Italian repatriants, the issues of colonial returns has not been given significant attention in Italian public commemoration or educational curricula. Despite the lack of official recognition, many oral histories and memory from Italians who lived in Tunisia document the deep connection between the Italian community and the North African countries. These stories reveal the emotional impact of being forced to leave a place that was home for generations and the trauma of losing land and properties. This personal account offers insight into the sense of loss felt by repatriates, their displacement, and their efforts to rebuild their lives in Italy or in France, often facing economic hardship and the social prejudice. Okay, conclusions. In the conclusions, I would like to underline continuities and ruptures between the past and present. The link between post-colonial repatriation and contemporary migration flow largely concern forced migration driven by geopolitical change. The key difference is that while post-colonial repatriations involve citizens of a colonial power returning to a homeland they had left generation earlier, today migration flow are often directed from unstable regions to countries that had once colonized to land. For example, the repatriation of Italian from Libya or from Tunisia and other former Italian colonies were largely forced due to the end of colonial rule and the political conflict that followed. The emergence of new sovereign states seeking to reassert their independence and identity often involved the nationalization of land and expulsion of colonial settlers, who were seen as part of the colonial legacies. Today, the phenomenon of forced migration is still prevalent, especially in relations to armed conflict, political instability, ethnic and religious persecution, and climate change. For instance, significant migration flow are coming from areas like Syria, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, alongside the economic difficulties and repressive government policies in many other regions of the world. The repatriates from Libya and Tunisia often face discrimination and marginalization upon their return to Italy. Despite being Italian citizens, these immigrants were perceived as foreigners or outsiders, as they had lived for decades in different cultural and social contexts. Today, migrants coming from Africa, from Middle East, and other regions often face racial discrimination and marginalization in the destination countries, particularly in Europe. The repatriates often face an economic struggle upon their return to Italy. Many arrived with few resources and to deal with the difficult process of reintegrations in countries undergoing economic growth but still grappling with high employment. Today, migrants also face similar economic and social challenges. Discrimination at work, lack of access to a resource, and the legal obstacles still prevent them from easily integrating in the job market. The arrival of Italians from Libya or from Tunisia highlighted the complex relations with colonial history. Despite being Italian citizens, they were still linked to a colonial past that generated ambiguities and sometimes rejection. Italy, as a former colonial power, had not fully addressed the colonial legacies and the historical responsibility of these migrations, making it difficult for the repatriates to be recognized as victims or as part of the country's history. The colonial legacy is still a relevant theme in today's discussion on migration flows, especially in Europe. The historical memory of colonialism influenced how migrants from former colonies are perceived. In many cases, colonial culture and racial prejudice persist in migration policies and in civil society, contributing to xenophobia and rejection of migrants. I'm finished. Thank you. Well,
Ok, alors un grand merci encore à nos intervenants pour votre participation qui a été toute très enrichissante. Donc, la présentation de Madame Olas nous a permis de mettre en lumière les différents outils dédiés au Fonds migration, aux Archives nationales à travers la présentation de 4 projets. Donc, le premier projet est une rédaction d'un instrument de recherche des états de fonds. Donc, il permet premièrement de contourner le manque de visibilité de description d'archives sur les migrants et il aide à l'orientation sur les recherches de ce. Donc, ce dernier repose sur des fonds d'opération et d'association. Le deuxième projet, donc nommé Girophare, qui est une plateforme d'indexation collective, contribue donc à numériser les fiches qui représentent quand même 1 million d'individus. Le troisième projet, Women on the Move, est d'une envergure européenne qui permet la création d'un état général de fonds à l'échelle européenne sur la thématique des femmes, donc du XIVe siècle à nos jours. Et enfin, le dernier projet est un groupe de travail intitulé Patrimoine des migrations humaines qui s'inscrit dans un projet de lutte contre le racisme, l'antisémitisme et la discrimination.
Merci encore de votre écoute et votre participation. Je vais d'abord faire une petite conclusion en anglais. So, migration influenced by many events like colonization, war, decolonization, economic and political crisis. And we saw this with the case of Italian in Libya, with the case of 1970 with the Turkish war, who was the treasury, or with the Italian in Tunisia. But the condition for this migration were complicated, as we have seen with the camps. And even today, this migration is kind of oublié. Forgot. Nous avons alors pu voir le cas de la migration en Libye et en Tunisie, avec des enjeux assez importants de la migration, avec des impacts sur les guerres, ou encore la décolonisation, les crises économiques et politiques, etc. D'autre part, cette migration est assez oubliée et marginalisée. Et donc, je pense que ce sujet peut être encore assez abouti et parlé. Merci.
Merci à vous. On va pouvoir passer aux questions s'il y en a. Oui, Corentin. Oui.
Hello, I'm sorry, I have a little question to Mr. Sabina. First, I want to say thank you for the presentation you got. I would like to ask you a little question. I hope I will be able to choose the most precise and the right word to express it. So you've clearly established a link between post-colonial migrations and current migration. And I'm focusing about the question concerning current immigration and the question of post-colonialism. Do you think that today in Europa, Italia, such as in French or in other European countries, there is an hostility against the current immigrant because of, how can I explain that? Because of post-colonial heritage. To take an example of French former inhabitants of Algeria, who are today, they may say, oh, we have to leave Algeria, and now Algerians or other immigrants want to come to home. Can we explain the current hate against immigrants because of post-colonial French rancor or French voilà, what's the English word for rancor ou yes, why? Because they say, hey, we used to be in Algeria, we used to be in Libya, and we had to leave, and now they want to come to home. It's unfair for us. Can we explain this current hate by this situation?
Non ho capito la domanda. I don't understand the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's my fault. I don't understand the question.
Storia degli immigranti oggi viene da queste politiche l'università che è legata a possiamo dire quando c'è un nodo degli immigranti che viene da quel periodo di coloniale.
Rispondere in italiano facciamo prima?
Ok? Come ti pare? Come ti
Così
pare?
facciamo prima.
Basta che fai presto.
I ask in Italian the professor Pifanelli translate in French, ok? Ok, come ho cercato, diciamo, di illustrare nella presentazione, nelle conclusioni, dove ho cercato di collegare, ho cercato di sottolineare collegamenti o meno fra stato coloniale e gli attuali flussi migratori. Allora, sicuramente l'eredità lasciata dagli imperi coloniali in quei paesi ha creato delle realtà, ha avuto delle conseguenze importanti, in alcuni casi non ha permesso, diciamo, la costruzione, il processo di costruzione, state building, di quei paesi o quantomeno lo ha rallentato. L'odio che c'è oggi nei confronti dei migranti da parte degli europei non è sicuramente, diciamo, collegato al passato coloniale, ma è più è più una questione di nazionalismi intesi come chiudere le frontiere, si cavalca, diciamo, l'onda del numero di migranti che arrivano costantemente da 20-30 anni in Europa, quindi l'odio in sé per sé non è collegato, diciamo, al passato coloniale, ma è più, diciamo, un evolversi degli eventi che inizia da là, ma arriva ai giorni nostri, e questo, diciamo, però dire che l'odio è collegato al passato coloniale, no.
Je résume donc non, ce lien n'est pas si explicite que ça. En revanche, il y a eu politiques postcoloniales qui n'ont pas permis à ces États-là de bien structurer d'autres types de possibilités internes. Donc il n'y a pas un lien causal direct entre les flux migratoires d'aujourd'hui et les politiques précédentes, mais c'est beaucoup plus profond que ça en fait et articulé. Donc la question ne peut pas être simplement placée dans les termes d'un héritage, hein. C'est un héritage peut-être multifactoriel, mais il n'y a pas de lien causal direct entre les deux. J'essaie vraiment de résumer parce que j'ai vu le message d'Alexandre.
Il peut restreindre par lui. Il y a une question.
Oui, merci. Moi, j'ai une petite question pour Madame Olas concernant notamment les projets gyrophares. Euh, pour le moment, c'est un projet qui porte que sur les caisses individuelles de sécurité des migrants, c'est ça? Et c'est un projet participatif, ok? Euh, pour la création d'une base de données où on indexe juste les documents. Est-ce que on indexe les documents et ensuite on pourra aller les consulter, ou est-ce que c'est une indexation qui permet un traitement statistique à venir? Première question. Et dans quelle mesure, si on participe à cette indexation, eh bien, on peut avoir accès à la base de données pour eh bien, faire soi-même ce traitement statistique. Et ça, c'était une question. Est-ce que aussi c'est une base de données qui, euh, qui est amenée à être ouverte à d'autres sources, d'accord? Ou est-ce que c'est une base de données qui est, j'allais dire, monosource? Voilà, on ne traite qu'un seul type de fonds là-dessus. Et, et voilà, on s'arrête là pour le moment.
Alors, pour répondre à la dernière question, moi, je vous ai parlé du fonds des mineurs,
Ouais.
mais il y en a plein d'autres en ce moment qui sont d'ores et déjà en ligne. Par exemple, pour rester sur la thématique migration, il y a tous les dossiers de réfugiés espagnols actuellement en ligne. Donc ça c'est côté, c'est le pôle qui se charge des archives du ministère de l'Intérieur qui a mis ça en ligne. Mais du coup, oui, je crois qu'en ce moment, il y a 5 projets en cours sur la plateforme. Donc là, c'est un projet qui arrive à l'automne, mais il y en aura plein d'autres et il y en a d'ores et déjà un certain nombre. Ensuite, la base de données qui va être constituée, le but, ça va être un petit peu de la remanier pour pouvoir la traduire en instrument de recherche, pour pouvoir consulter les cotes. Et potentiellement, on l'a déjà fait. Je sais pas si, vu que c'est pas moi qui porte le projet, j'en sais rien. Souvent, ce qu'on fait quand on a des données comme ça qui sont structurées et correctes, parce que ça demande après un travail de vérification de la saisie, on les publie sur data.gouv pour faire un jeu de données qui est ensuite après réinterrogeable par les utilisateurs. Et les archives, vous pouvez quand même d'ores et déjà les consulter parce qu'elles sont microfilmées. Donc après, bon, le microfilm, c'est pas ce qu'il y a de plus pratique maintenant, mais on a plus les papiers en fait. Ça a été supprimé parce que microfilmé il y a longtemps. Voilà.
Charles, je te permets d'ajouter une chose, parce que c'est pas sur travail hier, si je sais les conventions qui lient nos masters en EPSI, je dirige CLUHA avec les archivations de perfil sur ce projet Gyrophare criminel. Donc nos étudiants ont accès à ça et c'est la raison aussi pour laquelle on a pu se rencontrer avec Anne-Charlotte. Donc voilà, les étudiants de master pourront participer pour des stages encadrés aux archives nationales. Euh, et je me permets une dernière considération, même s'il est tard, je promets, ça va être très rapide. D'abord, remercier les intervenants et les intervenantes d'aujourd'hui. Et la dernière intervention de Mario, je pense, l'a montré aussi. On était parti de très loin ce matin avec Sylvie et Christine. On est arrivé au très contemporain. On a vu que les migrations peuvent être physiques et qu'on se déplace pour plein de raisons. On a vu l'exil aussi, on a vu les migrations culturelles. On a vu des migrations forcées, hein, qui sont pas de l'exil, mais un peu quand même. Mais on a vu aussi des migrations juridiques, hein, quand on attribue une nationalité, on transfère, on se déplace juridiquement. C'est ce qui s'est passé avec l'Exode, en fait, hein. Ça s'est jamais passé comme ça. C'était une migration fiscale, hein. Le peuple d'Israël passe sous le contrôle fiscal de l'Égypte. C'était ça l'idée. Donc, effectivement, je pense qu'aujourd'hui, on a pas mal défriché le terrain. On n'a pas terminé du tout. Mais puisqu'il est 18h36 même, hein, je remercie les participants. Je remercie encore une fois les intervenants, mon cher collègue Dimitri. Et je vous souhaite un bon apéro. Merci.
Alors, alors avant de finir, j'aimerais adresser aussi quelques remerciements nécessaires. Donc déjà encore, immense merci à nos intervenants qui sont venus durant la fin de l'histoire. Donc un grand merci à Mario Savina, Anne-Charlotte Aulas, Naïma Germani, Céline Borello, Marine Duc, Sylvie Mazella et Christine Verna. J'aimerais également faire un remerciement au service communication de l'UHA qui a permis de faire un petit peu de com en fait sur l'UHA et d'imprimer les affiches. Également, immense merci à Hérodote qui s'est occupé de la logistique et de la nourriture. Grand merci aux L2 et L1 qui nous ont beaucoup aidés. Et aussi également un merci à Radioactive UHA qui nous a permis de faire des podcasts, des interviews qui seront disponibles d'ailleurs sur leur réseau, donc Spotify, Radioactive UHA. Et enfin, un dernier remerciement du coup à vous, public, qui êtes venu assister à cette conférence. C'est un public très agréable, c'est une journée qui a demandé beaucoup de boulot, donc je vous remercie d'être venu. Et c'est ainsi que je clôture la porte de l'histoire.
Se sont quand même chargés d'un énorme travail aussi d'organisation en très peu de temps. Donc, bravo. Rendez-vous sur mon master, la plateforme.